was laid out to me totally made sense, and then I started to think about that information. I was like, I actually like the decision. Okay, so a couple of things.
The 2024 NFL Draft brought many surprises, but none more stunning than the selection of Michael Penix Jr. at number 8 overall. The Atlanta Falcons had just won the offseason race for the signature of free agency's #1 quarterback, penning Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal. When the draft rolled around, there wasn't a single soul in the industry who expected Terry Fontenot and the Falcons to draft a quarterback in the first round, let alone the top 10. A pick that could have so easily been a top-end wide receiver or pass rusher became the heir to Kirk Cousins' throne before he'd actually even played a snap in Atlanta himself. Was it the ugliest draft pick of the last decade, or potentially a subtle genius move? Fans, analysts, and media quickly dragged the pick. Fontenot was labeled a clown across the board, and there was even video footage that emerged of him seemingly trying to explain the pick to team owner Arthur Blank. With the draft now behind us and the dust settled, we can thoroughly analyze the pick and understand why the Falcons opted for this path over others. This is the future of the Atlanta Falcons, uncovered. The Kirk Cousins contract is the glaring factor in all this madness. He had attracted significant interest in free agency, having boasted at least 2 very strong seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. The veteran possesses a level of experience that doesn't often become available in the NFL, and even if his playoff record leaves a little to be desired, Atlanta felt he was the right fit to complete their rebuild. Over the past couple of seasons, the Falcons have spent freely on defense. In 2023, they were the most active team on that side of the ball, signing free agents Jesse Bates, David Onyemata, Caden Ellis, Mike Hughes, Calais Campbell, and Bud Dupree. The draft allowed Atlanta to get significantly better too on offense, bringing in Bijan Robinson and offensive lineman Matthew Bergeron, and suddenly it was a very different looking outfit. Yet, despite their hefty spending and successful draft picks, the Falcons limped into a 7-10 season largely thanks to one major factor, a failed quarterback experiment led by Desmond Ridder. The franchise had failed to find a quarterback since the departure of Matt Ryan, who quarterbacked the team for 14 seasons. Without him, a subpar season of Marcus Mariota led the team to try out the 3rd-round pick Desmond Ridder. He was decent enough for the time being down the stretch to earn the season in 2023, but that ultimately failed.
As the Falcons head coach Raheem Morris truly loved the prospect that Michael Penix Jr.
Now the Falcons had a roster ready to compete and no quarterback to lead that offense. It was a devastating gap in their plans that led them to splash a small fortune on Kirk Cousins, and having done so, many circled the Falcons as the favorites to claim the NFC South title and push for a playoff run. They spent well on the defensive side the year prior, and so barely needed to use any of their 2024 free agency cap on that side of the ball. Instead, they opted to bring in Kirk Cousins and multiple receivers to bolster the talent around him. So why would you draft a rookie quarterback when your team is in a position to win now? Drafting someone like Rome Odunze would have potentially furthered and bolstered the wide receiver room, while a guy like Dan Turner might have wreaked havoc off the edge. Neither came to fruition, obviously, with Terry Fontenot instead opting to make the call to Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr., a quarterback who played 6 years of college football and only emerged as a viable option for the NFL in the last 2. It quickly became headline news, naturally, with the Falcons being one of the only teams in the top 10 who was a for sure-fire non-quarterback spot. When asked about it, Kirk Cousins' agent noted that neither he nor Cousins had any idea the pick was going to be a quarterback, and he was only told about it as it happened. So while it may work out in the long run, that's not exactly the greatest way to let your franchise quarterback know you just signed a $180 million deal to let know about it. Cousins is still yet to comment publicly, but all of a sudden, his 4-year deal looks a lot more like a 2-year deal for $100 million. After that, the Falcons may simply hand the keys over to Penix. But for all the reasons the draft pick doesn't look good for Kirk Cousins, it does work beautifully for Atlanta. The very maximum they have to contend with based on the details of the contract is 3 seasons. In 2027, the Falcons can get out of the deal for 3 years, $135 million total through the first 3 years. If Penix is ready, or perhaps already starting at that point, they'll allow Kirk Cousins to walk before his age 39 season. If they have indeed made the right selection in a rookie quarterback, the team is now set up for the next decade plus at the position, with a host of young talent offensively, including Bijan, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. One major critique of the pick revolved around Penix's age and injury history. He will turn 24 before the NFL season even begins, and if he is to develop as a project behind Kirk Cousins, he could be 26 or approaching 27 by the time he sees significant NFL action. If he takes over as the franchise quarterback after those 3 years of Kirk Cousins' deal, he'd be 27 years old, starting in his first NFL game. For comparison, Justin Herbert played 4 full seasons before his 26th birthday. And then there's the injuries, of course. Penix tore his ACL 3 games into his freshman season in Indiana. He tore that same ACL 2 seasons later in 2020 and has dislocated joints in both shoulders over the course of his career. That means his throwing shoulder has already been bothered by injury, as well as having a knee that suffered multiple ACL tears. For any quarterback, even one expected to start in the NFL right away, torn ACLs can be a nightmare. And while it may be less of a concern for Penix as a pocket passer, mobility is nearly essential in the modern game. Another injury to the same knee could potentially derail his career for good. After 3 full seasons in Indiana, Penix entered the transfer portal after having nearly started more than 7 games in a college football season, but with that in mind, he turned it all around in Washington and is now 2 full years free of injuries. Penix started all 28 games he possibly could start for the Huskies and guided them to a national championship appearance in the 2023 season. He threw for 67 touchdowns over the course of his 2 years in Washington as one of the most impressive pure passers in all of college football. So are all the injuries really a factor if he's had a clean bill of health for the past 2 years? Atlanta decided that they were certainly comfortable about both his age and injury history and will have undoubtedly done their homework on Penix and his condition before committing a top 10 draft pick to his name. That said, it still doesn't alter with those questioning the older rookie for a developmental role. If a team is to draft a quarterback to develop them and have them eventually take over, a player like J.J. McCarthy, who was barely 21 years old, might have made more sense. In a similar fashion to the situation Green Bay found themselves in when they selected Jordan Love. Love spent 3 full seasons in the NFL before he saw the fields as a starter for the Packers, a situation that Terry Fontenot has directly mentioned since drafting Michael Penix Jr. The major difference, though, is that Love was just 21 years old when he started the process. He's less than 6 months older than Penix and came into the league with a clear medical history, barring a single concussion. That's a very different medical report and situation than that in which the Falcons find themselves in with their rookie. However, if the Falcons have thoroughly researched their decision and are confident in the path they've chosen for their future, who are we to criticize? There's also the fact that the Falcons brass probably felt entirely comfortable with their roster going into the draft, to the point where they could afford to draft a quarterback over any other position. The first round of the draft was of course loaded with lots of wide receiver talent, including Rome Odunze, and he was still on the board when the Falcons made their pick. The Falcons do have Drake London entering the potential prime of his career and added both former Bears receiver Darnell Mooney and former Cardinal wide receiver Rondale Moore during free agency. And with Kyle Pitts at tight end and Bijan Robinson at running back, the Falcons simply didn't need to draft Odunze or Brock Bowers, although it could have helped. And when you look at the offensive line, they can easily work without a first-round offensive lineman too. He wouldn't be the first successful lefty in Atlanta Falcons quarterback history either. And even on the defensive side of the ball, Dallas Turner might have been nice, but a top 10 draft pick always felt like a bit of a reach for him. He still has a lot left to learn and needs to refine his game as a pass rusher before he has a shot at being a premier talent in the NFL. There's no doubt that the Falcons will have done their due diligence on him, and as many other teams did, but perhaps they felt he simply wasn't worth the value of the top 10 pick. No corner was drafted until the early 20s, and while adding a top-tier talent to play opposite A.J. Terrell would have been a luxury, it wasn't a necessity. The defensive line was the only real glaring need, and Atlanta still addressed it with what was a clear plan in mind. Indeed, they selected Penix in the top 10, but then followed up with 3 consecutive picks to bolster their defensive line. They spent their early second round on Roque Orhorhoro out of Clemson, a disruptive and versatile defensive lineman who should be able to contribute early to that Falcons defense. Then they went back for Braylon Trice in round 3 and Brandon Dorlus in round 4, adding an edge rusher and a defensive tackle in back-to-back rounds. You only need 1, but maybe perhaps 2 of those guys to be early impact players, and you've more than compensated for the need on the defensive line. Then, with one of the most talented and high-performing secondaries in all of football, featuring multiple All-Pros and Pro Bowlers in A.J. Terrell and Jesse Bates, what are we truly panicking for? The real truth here is that the Falcons team can win now with or without a first-round draft pick on either side of the ball. Breaking down the roster proves that, with very little room for error across the board. This is a well put together offensive line, a superb weapons, and a highly experienced quarterback. The defense will continue to unify under head coach Raheem Morris, and if all comes together as it should, nobody will care about the first round draft pick several months from now. More than anything, the Falcons have strategically built a roster that puts them back into contention in the NFC after multiple underwhelming seasons. Not only that, but a roster that Michael Penix Jr. will inherit when his time comes to lead the franchise forward in the wake of Kirk Cousins. The focus is still, and will still be, attempting to win the Super Bowl while Kirk Cousins leads the offense. Plus, we saw what the arrival of Jordan Love did to Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. He went out and won league MVPs in back-to-back seasons, fired up to prove himself over a rookie quarterback. Now, what team doesn't want that sort of reaction from their franchise signal caller? The other thing to remember here is that Kirk Cousins is coming back in his mid-30s from a torn Achilles. That's not an easy injury to come back from, and it will take time for him to heal and get back to 100%. And whoever says that he does, NFL teams draft the future occupiers of the greatest star positions every year. Why would it be any different for a quarterback? Terry Fontenot has not only bet his job, but his entire career in the NFL possibly for this being the right pick for the Falcons. And while so many are choosing to laugh at him right now, the more you sit with this pick and break it down, the more it does make sense. So 5 years from now, are we looking at a team that won the Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins and then can continue on to win more of them with Michael Penix Jr.? Or is it all falling apart at the seams with Terry Fontenot out of a job?